Chapter 6. His shift at the prince's bedchamber started at midnight, so Rumata decided to stop by his house to make sure everything was in order and to change clothes. The city this evening amazed him. The streets were dead silent, the taverns closed. Clusters of stormtroopers with torches in their hands were standing around at the intersections, clanking their weapons. They were quiet, as if waiting for something. A number of them approached Rumata, took a good look at him, and after recognizing him, just as silently let him pass. When he was about 50 steps from his door, a group of shady characters began to trail him. Rumata stopped, clanked his scabbards against each other, and the characters fell back. But he immediately heard the sound of a crossbow being loaded in the dark. Rumata hurried onward, clinging to the walls, groped for the door, and turned his key in the lock. He remained aware of his unprotected back the entire time, and he rushed into the entrance hall with a sigh of relief. All the servants were gathered in the entrance hall, armed as best they could be. It turned out that the door had already been tried a few times. Rumata didn't like that. Maybe I shouldn't go, he thought. To hell with him, the prince. "Where's Baron Pamper?" he asked. Uno, extremely agitated and with a crossbow on his shoulder, answered, "The Baron woke up at midday, drank all the brine in the house, and left again to make merry." Then, lowering his voice, he informed Rumata that Kira had been very worried and had asked about the master more than once. "All right," said Rumata. He ordered the servants to line up. There were 6 servants, not counting the cook, all of them tough and used to street brawls. They wouldn't tussle with the grey soldiers, of course. They'd be afraid of the anger of the all-powerful minister, but they'd be able to withstand the troops from Wagger's night army, especially since the bandits would be looking for easy prey. 2 crossbows, 4 poleaxes, heavy butcher knives, iron hats. The doors were sturdy and bound with iron, as was the custom. Or maybe he really shouldn't go. Rumata went upstairs and tiptoed into Kira's room. Kira was sleeping fully clothed, curled up on the still-made bed. Rumata stood over her with a lamp. To go or not to go? He really didn't want to go. He covered her with a quilt, kissed her cheek, and came back to his study. He needed to go. Whatever was happening, an operative had to be in the centre of things, and it benefits the historians. He chuckled, took the circlet off, wiped the lens carefully with a soft piece of suede, and put it back on. Then he called Uno and ordered him to bring a military uniform and a polished brass helmet. Shivering from the cold, he pulled on a metal-strum shirt shaped like chainmail underneath his waistcoat, right over his undershirt. The local chainmail offered decent protection from swords and daggers, but crossbow bolts punched right through it. Tightening the uniform belt with the metallic buckles, he told Uno, "Listen, kid, you're the one I trust the most. Whatever happens here, Kira must remain alive and well. Let the house burn down, let all the money get stolen, but you must save Kira for me. Take her away over the rooftops, down through the cellars, whatever you like, but save her, got it?" "Got it," said Uno. "Maybe my master shouldn't go today." "You listen to me. If I don't come back after 3 days, take Kira and bring her to the Siver, to the Hiccup Forest. Know where it is? Anyway, in the Hiccup Forest you should find the Drunken Lair. It's a hut not far back from the road. If you ask, you'll be shown the way. Just be careful who you ask. A man called Father Kabani will be there. You'll tell him everything. Got it?" "Got it. Only maybe Master shouldn't go." "I wish I didn't have to. I do. Duty calls. Well, take care." He gently flicked the boy's nose and returned his awkward smile. Downstairs, he gave the servants a short pep talk, went out the door, and found himself in the dark again. The bars clanged shut behind him. The prince's chambers had been poorly guarded through the ages. It's possible that was precisely why no one ever attempted to assassinate the Arkanarian princes, and there was definitely no one interested in the current prince. No one in the world needed this sickly, blue-eyed boy who resembled anyone but his father. Rumata liked the boy. His education had been woefully neglected, and therefore he was smart, wasn't cruel, and, probably instinctively, couldn't stand Don Raber. He liked to sing a variety of songs set to Zurin's poetry and to play with boats. Rumata had ordered him picture books from the Metropole, told him about the starry sky, and had won the boy once and for all with his tale of flying ships. For Rumata, who rarely interacted with children, the 10-year-old prince was the antithesis of every social class in this savage country. It was ordinary blue-eyed boys like this one, identical in every social class, who would grow up to be brutal, ignorant, and submissive men. And yet they, the children, showed no traces or beginnings of such rot. Sometimes Rumata thought it'd be great if all the people older than 10 years of age disappeared from the planet. The prince was already asleep. Rumata started his shift. He stood by the sleeping boy next to the departing guardsman, performing the complex motions with drawn swords required by etiquette. Then, as prescribed by tradition, he checked whether all the windows were locked, whether all the nurses were in place, and whether all the lamps were lit in all the chambers. After this, he came back to the front room, played a game of dice with the departing guardsman, and inquired how the noble Don felt about what was happening in the city. The noble Don, a man of great sagacity, thought very hard, and conjectured that the common people were preparing to celebrate the day of Holy Micha. Left alone, Rumata pulled up a chair to the window, sat back and began to watch the city. The prince's apartments were on a hill, and during the day you could clearly see the entire city all the way to the sea. But now everything was sunk in darkness, and the only things visible were scattered groups of lights, the intersections at which the stormtroopers were gathered with torches waiting for a sign. The city was asleep, or pretended to be. I wonder whether the inhabitants feel something horrible looming over them tonight. Or, like the noble Don of great sagacity, did they also think someone was preparing to celebrate the day of Holy Micha? 200,000 men and women, 200,000 blacksmiths, gunsmiths, butchers, haberdashers, jewelers, housewives, prostitutes, monks, money changers, soldiers, tramps, and surviving bookworms were currently tossing in bedbug-ridden, stuffy beds, sleeping, making love, recalculating profits in their heads, crying, grinding their teeth in anger or resentment. 200,000 people. To a visitor from Earth, they all had something in common. It was probably the fact that almost without exception they were not yet humans in the modern sense of the world, but blanks, unfinished pieces, which only the bloody centuries of history could one day fashion into true men, proud and free. They were passive, greedy, and incredibly, fantastically selfish. Almost all of them had the psychology of slaves. Slaves of religions, slaves of their own kind, slaves of their pathetic passions, slaves of avarice. And if the fates decreed for one of them to be born or become a master, he didn't know what to do with his freedom. He would again hurry to become a slave of wealth, a slave of outlandish excesses, a slave of his slaves. The vast majority of them weren't guilty of anything. They were too passive and too ignorant. Their slavery was the result of passivity and ignorance. And passivity and ignorance again and again breed slavery. If they were all identical, there would be reason to throw up your hands and lose hope. But they were still people, the bearers of the spark of reason. And here and there in their midst, the fires of the incredibly distant and inevitable future would kindle and blaze up. They would kindle despite it all, despite all their seeming unworthiness, despite the oppression, despite the fact that they were being trampled with boots, despite the fact that no one in the world needed them, and that everyone in the world was against them, despite the fact that, at best, they could expect contemptuous, puzzled pity. They didn't know that the future was on their side, that the future was impossible without them. They didn't know that in a world belonging to the terrible ghosts of the past, they were the only manifestation of the future, that they were an enzyme, a vitamin in society's organism. If you destroy this vitamin, society will rot, and social scurvy will begin. The muscles will go weak, the eyes will lose their sharpness, the teeth will fall out. No country can develop without science. It will be destroyed by its neighbours. Without arts and general culture, the country loses its capacity for self-criticism, begins to encourage faulty tendencies, starts to constantly spawn hypocrites and scum, develops consumerism and conceit in its citizens, and eventually again becomes a victim of its more sensible neighbours. Persecute bookworms all you like. Prohibit science and destroy art, but sooner or later you'll be forced to think better of it, and with much gnashing of teeth open the way for everything that is so hated by the power-hungry dullards and blockheads. And no matter how much the grey people in power despise knowledge, they can't do anything about historical objectivity. They can slow it down, but they can't stop it. Despising and fearing knowledge, they will nonetheless inevitably decide to promote it in order to survive. Sooner or later they will be forced to allow universities and scientific societies to create research centres, observatories and laboratories, and thus to create a cadre of people of thought and knowledge, people who are completely beyond their control, people with a completely different psychology and with completely different needs. And these people cannot exist and certainly cannot function in the former atmosphere of low self-interest, banal preoccupations, dull self-satisfaction, and purely carnal needs. They need a new atmosphere, an atmosphere of comprehensive and inclusive learning, permeated with creative tension. They need writers, artists, composers, and the grey people in power are forced to make this concession too. The obstinate ones will be swept aside by their more cunning opponents in the struggle for power, but those who make this concession are, inevitably and paradoxically, digging their own graves against their will. For fatal to the ignorant egoists and fanatics is the growth of a full range of culture in the people, from research in the natural sciences to the ability to marvel at great music. And then comes the associated process of the broad intellectualization of society, an era in which greyness fights its last battles with a brutality that takes humanity back to the Middle Ages, loses these battles, and forever disappears as an actual force. Rumata kept looking at the city, motionless in the dark. Somewhere out there, in a stinking garret, curled up on a pathetic bed, the crippled Father Tara was burning with fever, and Brother Nanin sat by his side at a wobbly table, drunk, cheerful, and angry, finishing his treatise on rumours, using hackneyed phrases with relish to disguise a vicious mockery of grey life. Somewhere out there, Ger the storyteller was blindly wandering through empty, luxurious apartments, realizing with horror that despite everything, some mysterious pressure caused vivid worlds full of remarkable people and extraordinary feelings to burst into his consciousness out of the depths of his torn, trampled soul. And somewhere out there, God knows how, Dr. Budach was whiling away the night, broken down, brought to his knees, tormented but alive. My brothers, thought Rumata, I'm yours. I'm the flesh of your flesh. He suddenly felt with tremendous force that he was no god, shielding the fireflies of reason with his hands, but instead a brother helping a brother, a son saving a father. I'll kill Don Raber, he thought. What for? He's killing my brothers. He knows not what he does. He's killing the future. It's not his fault. He's a product of his time. So he doesn't know it's his fault? But does it matter whether he knows it? I know it's his fault. And what will you do with Father Zupik? Father Zupik would give a lot for Don Raber to be killed. You're silent. There are a lot of people you'd need to kill, aren't there? I don't know. Maybe there'd be a lot, one after the other, everyone who raises a hand against the future. That's been done already. They used poison, they threw pipe bombs, and nothing changed. No, things did change. That's how the strategy for the revolution was created. You don't need to create a strategy for the revolution. You just want to kill. Yes, I do. And are you capable of it? Yesterday I killed Doña Arcana. I already knew that I was killing her when I walked towards her with a feather behind my ear, and the only thing I regret is killing her in vain. So they've almost taught me. But that's bad. That's dangerous. Remember Sergei Kozhin? And George Lenny? And Sabina Kruger? Rumata passed a hand over his damp forehead. You keep thinking like this, and eventually you invent gunpowder. He jumped up and opened the window. The groups of lights were now in motion, dispersing, lining up, then moving forward, appearing and disappearing between the invisible houses. Some kind of noise sounded above the city, a distant, many-voiced howl. 2 fires broke out and illuminated the neighbouring rooftops. Something blazed up at the port. Things were developing. In a few hours he would know the meaning of the alliance between the Grey Army and the Night Army, the unnatural accord between shopkeepers and highway robbers. He would learn what Don Raber was trying to do and what new provocation he had conceived. Or, to put it simply, who was being slaughtered today. Chances were that it was the beginning of a Night of the Long Knives, which would see the destruction of a grey leadership that had gone too far, accompanied by an extermination of the barons who happened to be in town and the most inconvenient of the aristocrats. I wonder how Pampa is doing, he thought. If he's not sleeping, he'll fight them off. He didn't have the chance to finish his thought. Someone was pounding on the door with a heart-rending wail of, "Open up! Guardsman, open up!" Rumata threw back the bolt. A half-dressed man, blue-grey from fear, burst in, grabbed Rumata by the lapels of his waistcoat and shrieked, trembling, "Where's the prince? Budak has poisoned the king! Irukanian spies have started a riot in the city! Save the prince!" This was the minister of the court, a foolish and highly loyal man. Pushing Rumata away, he dashed into the prince's bedroom. Women screeched. Sweaty, jowly stormtroopers in grey shirts were already trying to get through the door. Rumata drew his swords. "Back off," he said coldly. He heard a short, muffled scream in the bedroom behind him. Something's not right, thought Rumata. I don't understand a thing. He jumped into a corner and barricaded himself in with a table. Stormtroopers were filling the room, breathing hard. There were about 15 of them. A lieutenant in a tight grey uniform pushed his way to the front, his blade drawn. "Don Rumata," he said, out of breath, "you're under arrest. Lay down your swords." Rumata gave a derisive laugh, glancing at the window. "Take them," he said. "Get him!" the officer barked. 15 well-fed bumpkins with axes weren't too much for a man who'd mastered methods of battle that would only become known on this planet 3 centuries in the future. The mob pressed forward and fell back. A number of axes remained on the floor. 2 stormtroopers were doubled over and clambering into the back rows, carefully cradling their dislocated arms. Rumata had complete mastery of the fan defense, in which attackers are faced with a solid curtain of gleaming steel, and breaking through this curtain seems impossible. The stormtroopers, huffing and puffing, exchanged uncertain glances. They gave off a sharp odour of beer and onions. Rumata pushed the table away and carefully walked to the window along the wall. Someone in the back rows threw a knife but missed. Rumata laughed again, put a foot on the windowsill and said, "Try it again, and I'll start chopping hands off. You know me." They knew him. They knew him extremely well, and not one of them budged, despite the cursing and prodding of the officer, who nonetheless was also behaving very cautiously. Rumata stood on the windowsill, continuing to make threatening gestures with his sword, and at that very moment a spear came out of the backyard and hit him in the back. It was a terrible blow. It didn't pierce the Metalstrom shirt, but it knocked him off the windowsill and threw him onto the floor. Rumata didn't let go of his swords, but they were now completely useless. The entire herd was immediately on top of him. Together they probably weighed more than a ton, but they got in each other's way, and he managed to get to his feet. He slammed his fist into someone's wet lips. Someone screamed like a rabbit under his arm. He kept smashing and smashing them with his elbows, fists, and shoulders. He hadn't felt this free in a long time, but he couldn't shake them off. With great difficulty, dragging a pile of bodies behind him, he walked toward the door, bending down and tearing off stormtroopers who clung to his legs along the way. Then he felt a painful blow to the shoulder and fell onto his back. The crushed stormtroopers flailed beneath him, but he stood up again, delivering short strikes with full force, causing the stormtroopers to smack heavily into the walls, waving their arms and legs. The twisted face of the lieutenant, who was holding his unloaded crossbow in front of him, was already flickering before his eyes. But then the door opened and some new sweaty faces clambered toward him. They threw a net on him, tightened the ropes on his legs, and toppled him. He immediately stopped struggling, conserving his strength. They trampled him with boots for some time, intently, silently, grunting avidly. Then they grabbed him by the feet and dragged him. As he was being pulled past the bedroom door, he had time to see the minister of the court pinned to the wall with a spear and a heap of blood-stained sheets on the bed. So it's a coup, he thought. Poor boy. They started dragging him down the stairs, and then he lost consciousness. Chapter 7. He was lying on a grassy hillock and looking at the clouds drifting in the deep blue sky. He was calm and content, but a prickly, bony pain was sitting on an adjacent hillock. It was outside him and at the same time inside him, especially in his right side and the back of his head. Someone barked, "Did he croak or something? I'll tear your heads off!" And then a mass of ice-cold water fell from the sky. He really was lying on his back and looking at the sky, except he wasn't on a hillock but in a puddle, and the sky wasn't blue but leaden and black, illuminated with red. "Nah," said another voice. "His lordship's alive, blinking those peepers." I'm the one who's alive, he thought. They're talking about me. I'm the one blinking my peepers. But why are they speaking funny? Have they forgotten how to talk like human beings? Someone moved nearby and splashed heavily through the water. The black silhouette of a head wearing a pointed cap appeared in the sky. "Well, noble Don, will you walk yourself, or should we drag you?" "Untie my legs," Rumata said angrily, feeling a sharp pain in his swollen lips. He felt them with his tongue. Some lips, he thought, pancakes instead of lips. Someone fumbled at his feet, unceremoniously yanking them and moving them around. He heard low voices around him. "You got him good." "Had to. He almost took off. He must be charmed. Arrows bounced off of him." "I knew a man you could take an axe to and it didn't do nothing." "Must have been a peasant." He was. That's what did it. And this one's noble born. I'll stick a tail in it. Can't do nothing with these damn knots. Some light here." "So use a knife." "Please, brothers, don't untie him. He'll start swiping at us again. He almost crushed my head as it is." "Nah, bet you he won't." "Brothers, do what you want. But I hit him real hard with that spear. I've pierced armour like that." An imperious voice shouted from the darkness. "Hey, you almost finished?" Rumata felt that his legs were free, tensed his muscles, and sat up. A few squat stormtroopers were silently watching him squirm in the puddle. Rumata gritted his teeth in shame and humiliation. He wriggled his shoulder blades. His hands were twisted behind his back in such a way that he couldn't even tell his elbows from his wrists. He mustered all his strength, jerked himself up to his feet, and was immediately twisted by the terrible pain in his side. The stormtroopers laughed.
"Betcha he won't run away,"
said one.
"Yeah, his lordship's a bit tired. Stick a tail in it." "Come on, Don. Not enjoying yourself?"
"Enough prattle," said the imperious voice from the darkness. "Come here, Don Rumata." Rumata walked toward the voice, feeling himself tottering from side to side. A little man with a torch appeared out of somewhere and went ahead of him. Rumata recognized this place. It was one of the countless interior courtyards of the Ministry of the Defense of the Crown, somewhere near the royal stables. He quickly realized, if they take me to the right, that means the tower, the dungeon. If they take me to the left, that means the office. He shook his head. "It's okay," he thought. "While I'm alive, I can still fight." They turned left. Not right away, thought Rumata. There will be a preliminary investigation. That's strange. If it comes down to an investigation, what can they accuse me of? I guess that's easy. Inviting the poisoner Budach, poisoning the king, plotting against the crown, possibly murdering the prince, and, of course, spying for Irukan, Soan, the barbarians, the barons, the Holy Order, and so on and so forth. It's simply astonishing that I'm still alive. The pale fungus must be plotting something else. "Over here," said the man with the imperious voice. He opened a low door, and Rumata crouched down and entered a spacious room lit by a dozen lamps. There were tied-up, bloodied people sitting and lying down in the middle of a threadbare carpet. A few of them were either already dead or unconscious. Practically all of them were barefoot in tattered nightshirts. Red-faced troopers, savage and self-satisfied, were standing along the walls, casually leaning on their axes and pole-axes, the champions of the night. An officer holding a sword, his hands behind his back, was pacing back and forth in front of them, wearing a grey uniform with an extremely greasy collar. Rumata's escort, a tall man in a dark cloak, approached the officer and whispered something in his ear. The officer nodded, looked curiously at Rumata, and disappeared behind the colourful curtains at the opposite end of the room. The stormtroopers were examining Rumata curiously. One of them, with an eye swollen shut, said, "A nice rock on the Don." "That's some rock," another one agreed. "Fit for a king, and a circlet's solid gold. We're all kings today. So let's take it." "Enough," the man in the black cloak said quietly. The stormtroopers stared at him, bewildered. "Who's this come to pester us?" said the swollen-eyed stormtrooper. The man in the cloak turned around without answering, walked over to Rumata and stood by his side. The stormtroopers looked him up and down with hostile eyes. "A priest, huh?" the swollen-eyed stormtrooper said. "Hey, friar, your robe on fire?" The stormtroopers guffawed. The swollen-eyed stormtrooper spat on his hands, tossing his axe from one hand to the other, and moved toward Rumata. He's really going to get it now, thought Rumata, slowly drawing back his right foot. "Who I've always beaten up," the stormtrooper continued, stopping in front of him and examining the man in black, "is priests, literates of any kind, and toolsmen. Once I—" The man in the cloak raised his hand, palm up. A loud snap came from just below the ceiling. Buzz! The swollen-eyed stormtrooper dropped his axe and fell onto his back. A short, thick crossbow bolt with dense feathering protruded from the middle of his forehead. The room went quiet. The stormtroopers backed away, nervously eyeing the vents beneath the ceiling. The man in the cloak lowered his hand and ordered, "Remove the carcass, quickly." Several stormtroopers dashed forward, grabbed the dead man by his hands and feet, and dragged him away. A grey officer emerged from behind the curtains and waved invitingly. "Let's go, Don Rumata," said the man in the cloak. Rumata walked towards the curtains, going around the group of prisoners. I don't understand a thing, he thought. In the darkness behind the curtains they grabbed him, searched him, tore the empty scabbards off his belt, and then pushed him into the light. Rumata immediately realized where he'd been taken. He was in Don Reber's familiar office in the Lilac Quarters. Don Reber was sitting in the same place and in exactly the same position, tensely upright, his elbows on the desk and his fingers interlaced. You know, the old man has hemorrhoids, Rumata suddenly thought with pity. On Don Reber's right side, Father Zupik sat in state, pompous, concentrated, with pursed lips. On his left side there was a genially smiling fat man with captain's stripes on his grey uniform. There was no one else in the office. When Rumata entered, Don Reber said quietly and affectionately, "And here, my friends, is the noble Don Rumata." Father Zupik grimaced contemptuously, while the fat man nodded graciously. "Our old and rather constant foe," said Don Reber.
"Foes get hanged,"
Father Zupik rasped. "And what is your opinion, Brother Abba?" asked Don Reber, helpfully leaning toward the fat man.
"You know, somehow I don't even—"
Brother Abba gave an uncertain, childlike smile, spreading his pudgy little hands.
"You know, somehow I don't care. But maybe we shouldn't hang him. Maybe we should burn him. What do you think, Don Reber?"
"Yes, probably," Don Reber said pensively.
"You see,"
the enchanting Brother Abba continued, smiling affectionately at Rumata,
"we hang the trash, the small fry, and we must maintain the people's respect for the social classes. After all, he's a scion of an ancient family, a noted Irukanian spy. It's Irukanian, if I'm not mistaken."
He grabbed a piece of paper off the desk and peered at it with nearsighted eyes.
"Oh, and Soanian too, even more so." "So let's burn him,"
Father Zupik agreed. "Very well," said Don Reber. "Agreed. We'll burn him.
However, I think Don Rumata can improve his own lot," Brother Abba said. "You see what I'm saying, Don Reber?"
"I have to admit, not exactly."
"The property, my dear noble Don, the property. The Rumatas are a fabulously rich family."
"You are right, as always," Don Reber said. Father Zupik yawned, covering his mouth with his hand, and glanced at the lilac curtains to the right of the table. "Well, let us then begin in due form," Don Reber said with a sigh. Father Zupik kept glancing at the lilac curtains. He was clearly waiting for something and was completely uninterested in the proceedings. "What are they playing at?" thought Rumata. "What does this mean?" "Well, my noble Don," Don Reber said, addressing Rumata, "it would be extremely gratifying to have you answer a number of questions of interest to us." "Untie my hands," said Rumata. Father Zupik recoiled and dubiously moved his lips. Brother Abba frantically shook his head. "Oh?" Don Reber said, and first looked at Brother Abba, then at Father Zupik. "I understand you, my friends. However, under the circumstances, which Don Rumata probably suspects—" He gave an expressive look at the rows of vents beneath the ceiling. "Untie his hands," he said, without raising his voice. Someone silently came up behind him. Rumata felt someone's strangely soft, dexterous fingers touch his hands, and he heard the ropes creak as they were being cut. Brother Abba, with surprising agility for his bulk, took a huge combat crossbow out from underneath the desk and placed it on the papers in front of him. Rumata's hands dangled at his sides like whips. He almost couldn't feel them. "Let us begin," Don Reber said briskly. "Your name, family, station?" "Rumata. From the family of the Rumatas of Estor, a noble gentleman through 22 generations." Rumata looked around, sat down on the sofa, and began to massage his wrists. Brother Abba, breathing anxiously through his nose, aimed the crossbow at him.
"Your father?"
"My noble father was an imperial adviser, loyal servant, and faithful friend of the Emperor."
"Is he alive?"
"He's dead."
"How long?"
11 years.
"How old are you?"
Rumata didn't have the time to answer. There was a noise behind the lilac curtains. Brother Abba looked around, displeased. Father Zupik, smiling ominously, slowly stood up.
"Well, that's all, my dear sirs,"
he began, cheerfully and maliciously. 3 people Rumata least expected to see here jumped out from behind the curtains. They were enormous monks in black cassocks with hoods pulled down over their eyes. They swiftly and silently ran up to Father Zupik and took him by the elbows.
"Ah, but,"
mumbled Father Zupik. His face had turned ashen. He had clearly been expecting something completely different. "With your permission, Brother Abba?" Don Raber inquired calmly, bending down toward the fat man.
"But of course,"
he replied emphatically.
"Certainly."
Don Raber made a slight motion with his hand. The monks picked up Father Zupik and, moving just as noiselessly as before, took him away behind the curtains. Rumata winced in disgust. Brother Abba rubbed his soft little paws together and said briskly,
"Everything went marvellously, don't you think, Don Raber?"
"Yes, it wasn't bad," Don Raber agreed. "But let us continue. Well, how old are you, Don Rumata?" 35. "When did you arrive in Arkana?" 5 years ago. "From where?" "I was previously living in Estor at the family castle." "And what was the purpose of your relocation?" "Unfortunate circumstances forced me to leave Estor. I was searching for a capital that could compare in splendor to the capital of the metropole." Fiery prickles finally started running up and down his arms. Rumata continued to patiently and persistently massage his swollen wrists. "Do tell us, what were these circumstances?" asked Don Raber. "I killed a member of a most august family in a duel." "Is that so? Who was it?" "The young Duke Ekin." "And the reason for the duel?" "A woman," Rumata said curtly. He began to suspect that all these questions didn't mean anything. This is a game, he thought, just like the discussion of the method of execution. I'm waiting until my hands recover. Brother Abba, the fool, is waiting for the gold from Don Rumata's ancestral treasury to pour into his lap. Don Raber is also waiting for something. But the monks! The monks! Why are there monks in the palace? Especially such skillful and energetic ones. The woman's name? The questions he asks, thought Rumata. They couldn't be any stupider. Let me try to wake them up a bit. "Doña Rita," he answered. "I didn't expect you to answer. Much obliged. I'm always ready to be of service." Don Raber bowed. "Have you ever been to Irukan?" "No." "Are you certain?" "You are certain of it, too." "We want the truth," Don Raber demanded. Brother Abba nodded, "and nothing but the truth." "Aha," said Rumata. "And here I thought—" He paused. "What did you think?" "I thought you mostly wanted to get your hands on my ancestral property. I simply can't imagine, Don Raber, in what way you hope to get it."
"What about a deed of gift? A deed of gift?" Brother Abba cried out.
Rumata laughed as derisively as possible. "You're a fool, Brother Abba, if that's what you're called. I could immediately tell that you're a shopkeeper. Are you not aware that an entailed estate cannot be transferred into the hands of a stranger?" He could see that Brother Abba was completely furious, but restraining himself. "You shouldn't speak in that tone," Don Raber said gently. "You wanted the truth?" Rumata countered. "Here's the truth, the real truth, and nothing but the truth. Brother Abba is a nitwit and a shopkeeper." However, Brother Abba had already regained control of himself.
"I believe we've digressed," he said with a smile. "What do you think, Don Reba?"
"You are right, as always," said Don Reba. "Noble Don, have you ever been to Soan?" "I've been to Soan." "For what purpose?" "To visit the Academy of Science." "A strange purpose for a man of your rank." "A whim." "And are you familiar with the Chief Justice of Soan, Don Condor?" Rumata became wary. "He is a very old friend of my family." "A most noble man, is he not?" "A very respectable person." "And are you aware that Don Condor was involved in the plot against His Majesty?" Rumata jutted out his chin. "Get it into your head, Don Reba," he said arrogantly. "For us, the hereditary nobility of the metropole, all these Soans and Irukans and even Arkanars were, and will always remain, vassals of the imperial crown." He crossed his legs and turned away. Don Reba was looking at him thoughtfully. "Are you rich?" "I could buy all of Arkanar, but I'm not interested in garbage dumps." Don Reba sighed. "My heart is bleeding," he said. "To cut down such a glorious offspring of such a glorious family. It would be a crime if it were not brought about by the exigencies of state." "Think less about the exigencies of state," Rumata said, "and more about your own hide." "You're right," Don Reba said, then snapped his fingers. Rumata quickly clenched and unclenched his muscles. His body seemed to be working. 3 monks again jumped out from behind the curtains. With the same elusive speed and accuracy, indicating vast experience, they formed a circle around Brother Abba, who was still smiling sweetly, grabbed him, and bent his hands behind his back. "Ow, ow, ow, ow!" shrieked Father Abba, his fat face contorted in pain. "Quick, quick, hurry up," Don Reba said with distaste. The fat man resisted frantically as he was dragged behind the curtains. They could hear him screaming and yelping. Then he suddenly shrieked in a horrible, unrecognizable voice and immediately went silent. Don Reba stood up and carefully unloaded Father Abba's crossbow. Rumata watched him, stunned. Don Reba paced up and down the room, pensively scratching his back with a crossbow bolt. "Good, good," he mumbled almost tenderly. "Charming." He seemed to have forgotten about Rumata. His steps kept getting quicker and quicker. He waved the bolt like a conductor's baton as he walked. Then he suddenly stopped abruptly at the desk, tossed the bolt away, gingerly sat down and said, smiling from ear to ear, "How I got them, huh? Not a peep. They can't do that where you come from, I think." Rumata was silent. "Yes," Don Reba intoned dreamily. "Good. Well, now let us talk, Don Rumata. Or maybe it's not Rumata. Maybe you're not even a Don, Rumata was silent, examining him curiously. Pale-skinned, with red veins on his nose, whole body shaking with excitement. He just wants to shout, clapping his hands. I know, and you don't know a thing, you son of a bitch, and if you find out, you won't believe it. Well, go on, I'm listening." "I'm listening to you," he said. "You're not Don Rumata," Don Reba announced. "You're an impostor." He looked at Rumata, a severe expression on his face. "Rumata of Estor died 5 years ago and is lying in his family's vault, and the saints have long since laid to rest his rebellious and frankly not particularly pure soul. Well, will you confess on your own, or do you need some help?" "I'll confess," said Rumata. "My name is Rumata of Estor, and I'm not accustomed to having my words doubted." "Let me try to make you a little angry," he thought. My side hurts, or else I'd lead you on a merry chase. I see that we will have to continue the conversation elsewhere, Don Raber said ominously. His face was undergoing extraordinary changes. Gone was the pleasant smile. His lips compressed into a hard line. The skin on his forehead was moving in a strange and eerie way. Yes, thought Rumata, he really can be frightening. Is it true that you have hemorrhoids? Rumata asked solicitously. Something flickered in Don Raber's eyes, but his facial expression didn't change. He pretended not to hear. You used Budach badly. He's a real master, Rumata said. At least he was, he added significantly. Something flickered in the faded eyes again. Aha, thought Rumata, Budach must still be alive. He sat back and wrapped his arms around one knee. Thus you refuse to confess? Said Don Raber. To what? To being an impostor. Honourable Raber, Rumata admonished. Such things need to be proved. You're insulting me. Don Raber's expression turned cloying. My dear Don Rumata, he said, forgive me. I will keep calling you by that name for the time being. Anyway, I don't usually prove a thing. They prove things elsewhere, in the Merry Tower. For this purpose I keep experienced, well-paid professionals who are capable of using Holy Micha's meat grinder, the greaves of our Lord, the gloves of the great Martyr Pata, or, say, the benches, the chairs of Tots the Warrior, to prove anything whatsoever. That God exists and that God doesn't exist. That people walk on their hands and people walk on their sides. Do you see what I'm saying? You may not be aware of this, but there's a whole science devoted to obtaining proofs. Judge for yourself. Why would I prove what I already know? And after all, a confession isn't dangerous for you. It's not dangerous for me, said Rumata. It's dangerous for you. Don Raber pondered for some time. All right, he said. It appears I'll have to start after all. Let's see what Don Rumata of Estor has been observed doing in the 5 years of his afterlife in the Arkanarian kingdom, and then you will explain to me the meaning of it all, agreed? I don't want to make any rash promises, Rumata said, but I'm interested in hearing you out. Don Raber rummaged in his desk, pulled out a square of thick paper, and, raising his eyebrows, scanned it. Let it be known to you, he said, smiling amiably. Let it be known to you that I, the Minister of the Defence of the Arkanarian Crown, undertook certain actions against the so-called bookworms, scientists and other worthless people detrimental to the state. These actions met with some strange resistance. At the same time as the whole nation acted in concert and, remaining faithful to the king and the Arkanarian traditions, helped me in any way possible, betrayed the hidden, meted out their own justice, directed me to suspicious characters that had escaped my attention. At this same time, some unknown but highly energetic person snatched the most important, most inveterate and abominable criminals from under our noses, and then sent them outside the kingdom. In this way the following people slipped through our fingers: the godless astrologer Bagir of Kisen, the criminal alchemist Sindar, who had been proven to have dallied with the devil and with the Irukanian regime, the vile pamphleteer and disturber of the peace Zuran, and a number of others of lower rank. The crazy sorcerer and mechanic Kabani disappeared somewhere. Someone spent a fortune in gold to prevent the people's wrath from being carried out against the god-forsaken spies and poisoners, the former healers of His Majesty. Under truly fantastical circumstances, forcing one to again recall the enemy of the human race, someone liberated the monster of depravity and corrupter of men's souls, the leader of the peasant revolt, Aratta the hunchback. Don Rebus stopped, and moving the skin on his forehead, looked at Rumata significantly. Rumata, looking up at the ceiling, smiled dreamily. He had abducted Aratta the hunchback by coming for him in a helicopter. This had made a stupendous impression on the guards. On Aratta, too, to be honest. That really was well done, he thought. I have done good work. Let it be known to you, Don Rebus continued, that the said Aratta is now personally leading the mutinous slaves through the eastern areas of the metropole, spilling an abundance of noble blood, experiencing no shortage of either money or weapons. I can easily believe it, Rumata said. He immediately struck me as a very determined man. So you confess, Don Rebus said immediately. To what? Rumata asked in surprise. They looked each other in the eye for some time. I will go on, said Don Rebus. The rescue of these corrupters of souls cost you, Don Rumata, according to my humble and incomplete estimates, no less than 100 pounds of gold. I won't mention the fact that in doing so you have forever polluted yourself by consorting with the devil. I also won't mention the fact that for the entirety of your stay in the Arcanarian kingdom you haven't received a single penny from your estate in Estor, and why should you have? Why send a dead man money, even if his family? But your gold! He opened a jewellery box that was buried beneath the paper on the desk and extracted from it a handful of gold coins with the profile of Pitts VI. This is the devil's gold. Human hands are incapable of producing metal of such purity. He was glaring at Rumata. Yes, thought Rumata generously, that's well done. That's something we probably should have thought of, and he's probably the first to notice. We must take that into account. Rebus suddenly calmed down again. Sympathetic paternal notes came into his voice. And you've always been so very imprudent, Don Rumata. This entire time I've been so worried about you. Such a duelist, such a troublemaker. 126 duels over 5 years, and not a single man killed. Someone could eventually draw conclusions from that. I did, for example, and I wasn't the only one. For example, tonight, Brother Abba— it isn't nice to speak ill of the dead, but he was a very cruel man. I found it difficult to tolerate him, I admit. Anyway, for your arrest, Brother Abba chose not the most capable fighters, but the fattest and the strongest. And he turned out to be right. A few dislocated arms, a few crushed necks, missing teeth are no concern, and here you are. And you must have known that you were fighting for your life. You're a master. You're doubtlessly the best swordsman of the Empire. You have doubtlessly sold your soul to the devil, for it is only in hell that you could have learned these incredible, fabulous methods of battle. I'm even ready to allow that you got this ability under the condition that you do not kill. Although it's hard to imagine why the devil would impose such a condition. But let our scholars figure that out. He was interrupted by a shrill, pig-like squeal, and glanced at the lilac curtains, displeased. There was a fight behind the curtains. They could hear dull blows, shrieks of let me go," and other hoarse voices, swearing and exclamations in a strange dialect. Then a curtain snapped off and fell to the floor. Some man burst into the office, collapsing onto all fours. He was bald, with a bloodied chin and wildly bulging eyes. Huge paws reached out from behind the curtain, grabbed the man's legs, and pulled him back. Rumata recognized him as Budach. He was shrieking wildly, "You lied to me! You lied to me! It was poison! Why?" He was dragged into the darkness. A man in black quickly picked up and hung the curtain. Silence fell. Then a disgusting noise came from behind the curtains. Someone was retching. Rumata understood. "Where's Budach?" he asked sharply. As you can see, some misfortune seems to have befallen him, Don Raber answered, but it was evident that he was caught off guard. Don't even try it, said Rumata. Where's Budach? Oh, Don Rumata, Don Raber said, shaking his head. He had already recovered. What do you want Budach for? What is he, related to you? You've never even seen him.
Listen, Raber,
Rumata said furiously.
I'm not kidding around. If anything happens to Budach, you'll die like a dog. I'll crush you.
You won't have enough time, Don Raber said quickly. He was very pale. You're a fool, Raber. You're an experienced schemer, but you don't understand a thing. Never in your life have you played a game as dangerous as this one, and you don't even know it. Don Raber cowered behind the desk, his eyes glowing like embers. Rumata felt that he had also never been this close to death. They were laying their cards on the table. Soon they would know who was to be the master in this game. Rumata tensed his muscles, getting ready to leap. No weapon, neither spear nor arrow, kills instantly. You could clearly read this thought on Don Raber's face. The hemorrhoidal old man wanted to live. Now don't be like that, he whined. We were just sitting around, talking. Your Budach's alive. Don't worry, alive and well. He was still going to treat me. No need to overreact.
Where's Budach?
In the Mary Tower.
I need him.
I need him too, Don Rumata.
Listen, Raber,
Rumata said.
Don't make me angry. And stop pretending. You're afraid of me, and rightly so. Budach belongs to me, understand? To me!
They had now both stood up. Raber was terrible. He had turned blue. His lips were twitching convulsively. He was mumbling and spluttering.
Whippersnapper,
he hissed.
I'm not afraid of anyone. I'm the one who could crush you like a bug.
He suddenly turned around and pulled back a tapestry hanging behind his back. There was a wide window behind it.
Look!
Rumata went to the window. It faced the square in front of the palace. Dawn was approaching. The smoke from the fires rose into the grey sky. The square was littered with corpses, and a motionless black rectangle stood at its centre. Rumata looked closer. These were horsemen, standing in an improbably precise formation, in long black cloaks, black hoods hiding their eyes, with black triangular shields on their left hands and long pikes in their right hands.
I present to you,
Don Raber said in a clanging voice. His whole body was shaking.
The humble men of our Lord, the cavalry of the Holy Order. They landed tonight at the port of Arkady to suppress the barbaric rebellion of the night tramps of Wagger the Wheel, in league with some swollen-headed shopkeepers. The rebellion has been suppressed. The Holy Order now has control of the city and country, which will henceforth be known as the Arkanarian region of the Order.
Rumata involuntarily scratched his head. I'll be damned, he thought. So that's who the unhappy shopkeepers were paving the way for. Quite the provocation. Don Raber was grinning triumphantly.
We have not met yet, he continued in the same clanging voice. Let me introduce you to the Holy Order's governor for the Arkanarian region, Bishop and Battlemaster, the servant of God, Raber.
You know, I could have guessed, thought Rumata. Wherever greyness triumphs, black robes come to power. Oh, historians, stick a tail in all of you. But he put his hands behind his back and rocked from toe to heel. Right now, I'm tired, he said disdainfully. I want to sleep. I want to take a hot bath and wash off the blood and saliva of your thugs. Tomorrow, actually today, let's say an hour after sunrise, I'll come back to your office. By this time, the order for Budach's release should be ready.
There are 20,000 of them!
Don Raber shouted, pointing at the window. Rumata winced. "A little quieter, please," he said. "And remember, Reba, I know very well that you're no bishop. You're just a filthy traitor and an incompetent petty schemer." Don Reba licked his lips. His eyes glazed over. Rumata continued. "I have no mercy. Any vile thing you do to me or my friends will cost you your head. Bear in mind, I hate you. I am willing to put up with you, but you will have to learn how to get out of my way in time. Do you understand me?" Don Reba said hurriedly, with a pleading smile, "I want only one thing. I want you to be on my side, Don Rumata. I can't kill you. I don't know why, but I can't." "You're afraid," said Rumata. "I'm afraid," Don Reba agreed. "Maybe you're the devil. Maybe you're the son of God. Who knows? Or maybe you're a man from the powerful countries overseas. They say those do exist. I don't even try to gaze into the abyss that brought you forth. My head spins and I fall into heresy. But I can kill you too. Any time. Right now, tomorrow, yesterday. Do you understand that?" "I'm not interested in that," Rumata said. "Then what? What are you interested in?" "I'm not interested in anything in particular," Rumata said. "I'm having a good time. I'm neither the devil nor God. I'm Rumata of Estor, a merry, noble gentleman, burdened with various whims and prejudices and accustomed to freedom in every way. Can you remember that?" Don Reba had already regained his composure. He wiped his face with a handkerchief and smiled pleasantly. "I value your determination," he said. "After all, you also aspire to certain ideals, and I respect these ideals, even though I don't understand them. I'm very glad that we've had this talk. It's possible that some day you will describe your views to me, and it's entirely possible that you will force me to reconsider my own. People are prone to making mistakes. Perhaps I'm wrong, and the goals I aspire to are not the ones worthy of the diligent and selfless work I've been doing. I'm an open-minded man, and I can easily imagine that one day I will work with you side by side.